Dale had canceled earlier that night. Family thing. He didn't give me much detail, and I didn't ask for any. When somebody says family thing, you either know what they mean or you don't, and either way, asking questions usually doesn't improve the situation. The salvage window ended the next morning. That was the part that mattered to me. The bank had given us until then to clear out whatever equipment they considered abandoned, and after that, the property was somebody else's problem, or somebody else's opportunity. Either way, we wouldn't get paid for anything left behind. Dale and I ran a two-man crew. It wasn't much of a crew, but it was ours. Copper, brass, old motors, wiring, whatever we could pull out and sell without spending more on the job than it was worth. Most jobs were a lot of work for not much money. This one had looked better on paper. The farm was outside Waupaca, down a gravel road with no lights and no houses close enough to make me feel like anybody was watching. I sat in the van for a minute before getting out and looked at the barn. No lights inside. No lights at the farmhouse either. No vehicles in the yard. The utility box on the side of the barn was dark, and the meter wasn't moving. I'd checked the account before coming out, and there hadn't been any recent activity. No power use. No water use that I could see. Nothing that suggested anybody had been living there. An empty farm is usually just an empty farm. People leave things behind when they lose a place. They leave wire in the walls, tools under benches, fittings on equipment, and sometimes whole machines too heavy to move before the bank takes over. That's what I was there for. I took the bolt cutters from the back of the van and walked over to the side door of the milking barn. The padlock was old and spotted with rust. It looked like it had been there for years, which was usually a good sign. New locks meant somebody cared about what was inside. I checked the ground before I cut it. There were tire tracks in the gravel, but they were old and half filled with weeds. No fresh mud, no footprints around the door. The dirt beside the threshold was dry and undisturbed. I put the jaws of the cutters around the shackle and squeezed. The lock gave with a sharp crack. I stood there and listened. Nothing moved inside the barn. Nothing moved around it either. I pulled the lock free, opened the door, and switched on my headlamp. I kept the beam pointed at the floor. You don't walk into a dark building shining a light straight ahead unless you want to announce exactly where you are. The first thing I looked for was footprints. Dust covered the concrete in most places, with old straw pressed into it and mouse droppings along the edges. There were no clear tracks going in or out. A few marks near the stalls looked like they had been made by boots, but they were too old to tell me anything. The edges were soft and gray. I stepped inside. The barn smelled like old hay, rust, and something sour that had soaked into the concrete a long time ago. Dairy barns always have that smell. You can clean them and paint them and leave them empty for years, and the place still remembers cows. I shut the door behind me but didn't lock it. I wasn't planning on being there long. That was the plan anyway. I started at the nearest line of pipes. Most of them ran above the stalls and disappeared into the walls. I put one hand around a valve and gave it a careful turn. Nothing happened. No hiss. No pressure. I moved to the next one and tapped the pipe with my knuckle. It sounded hollow. I tried another valve, then pressed my thumb against the end of a disconnected line. Dry. No water. No air. No pressure waiting inside to surprise me. That was good. There are rules to working in old buildings. You don't cut anything you don't understand. You don't assume a pipe is empty because the power is off. You don't take something just because it looks loose. And you don't touch anything that looks newer than the rest of the place until you know why it's newer. I'd been doing salvage work for 15 years, so I knew most of the ways a dead building could hurt you. Bad wiring, rotten floors, pressure tanks, broken glass, a roof that decided it was done holding itself up. The other rule was that you only take what the owner had abandoned. That one was harder to explain to people. If a bank has foreclosed on a property and sends you out to strip the usable material, then the material is abandoned. That's what the paperwork says. You don't take somebody's tools from a house they still live in. You don't pull copper out of a building with fresh lights in the windows. You don't make your own rules because you want a few extra dollars. I did what the paperwork allowed. I marked the insulated copper runs above the stalls with small pieces of orange tape. The tape was mostly for me. In a dark barn, it's easy to lose track of where you've already been, especially when every pipe looks like the one beside it. I had a small handsaw, a pair of cutters, and the pry bar I'd brought from the van. The loud tools could wait until I knew the place better. At first, I just walked the length of the stalls and looked. Most of the equipment was rusted out. Old brackets, bent rails, a couple of motors with their housings eaten through by corrosion. There was copper in some of it, but not enough to make the work worthwhile. I could spend an hour getting one motor loose and find out the inside was worthless. The bulk tank was different. It sat toward the back of the barn, big and round and dull under the dust. The metal was stained and the insulation around it had gone yellow. It looked like the sort of thing nobody wanted to move because it weighed too much and didn't look valuable from a distance. The valves were what mattered. Brass holds up better than most of the other metal in a dairy setup. The fittings, the shutoffs, the old connectors around the tank. They weren't much by themselves, but a bucket full of brass was worth carrying. Sometimes the best money in a dead farm was in the parts nobody bothered looking at. I moved toward the back, stepping around a collapsed section of railing. My headlamp stayed aimed low. The beam picked out screws in the concrete, bits of straw, and the pale curve of an old milk hose. There were feed pallets stacked along the rear wall. Most had broken boards and dark stains from years of sitting in the same place. I put my shoulder against the first stack and moved it aside a few inches, then did the same with the next one. I was looking for a clear path to the bulk tank when I noticed one section of plywood on the rear barn wall was held by newer screws. I put my fingers around the pry bar and worked it under the edge of the plywood. The screws were newer, but they weren't new enough to come out easy. They squeaked in the wood and left little curls of paint around the heads. I got one loose, then another. The bottom screw just spun in place, so I moved the bar down and pulled against the panel until the wood cracked. I stopped and listened. Nothing. That was becoming a less useful answer than it had been a few minutes earlier. An empty building can be quiet. A building with somebody inside it can be quiet too, especially if they know you're there. I pulled harder. The plywood came loose all at once and hit the concrete behind me. The sound went through the barn and came back from the far wall. I stood there with the pry bar in my hand and waited for somebody to move. Nobody did. The opening was too narrow to get through. There was another board behind it, and then a strip of framing that had been put in to hold the old wall together. I drove the pry bar into the gap and leaned my weight on it. The wood gave a little. I worked the bar back and forth until the strip broke away. There was a room behind the wall. Not a big room. Maybe 10 feet deep and only a few feet wider than my shoulders. It had been built between the ruined stalls and the outside siding, using the barn wall as one side of it. The concrete floor was clean. The walls were white. Not old white either. Fresh white. The paint still looked too bright under my headlamp. I kept the light aimed low and leaned in through the opening. There was a folding chair in the middle of the room. It wasn't against a wall or tucked into a corner. It was set right in the center, facing the opening. The metal legs were clean, and the seat didn't have any dust on it. I didn't like that. A chair is just a chair most of the time. You see one in a barn and it means somebody got tired and sat down. But a chair in a hidden room, set where a person could watch the door, is something else. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's not nothing. I widened the opening another few inches and squeezed through. The wood caught on my hoodie. I backed up and pulled the fabric free, then went in sideways with the pry bar held against my leg. The room smelled like paint and dry concrete. There was no hay smell in there, no mouse droppings, no old dairy stink soaked into the floor. The fixtures were newer too. A small light was mounted on the ceiling, though it was off, and there was a metal plate on one wall with a switch and an outlet. The outlet cover was clean. Somebody had wiped the dust off it. I moved my headlamp across the walls. That was when I saw the marks. There were tally marks cut into the wooden studs all around the room. Not a few marks here and there. Thousands of them. They covered the studs from floor to ceiling and ran behind the painted boards wherever there was space to reach them. They were arranged in bundles, 13 marks in each group. I counted the first one twice because I thought I'd missed something. 12 would have made more sense. 10 would have made sense. 5 was what people usually did when they kept track of things with their hands. 13 didn't make sense. I went to the next stud. Same thing. 13 marks, then a gap, then 13 more. Some of the marks were deep and old. Others looked sharper, like they had been made with a fresh nail or a knife point. I didn't touch them. While I was working around the straw near the drain, I'd found a little enameled pin. It had a white circle on it with 13 black dots inside. I still had it in my jacket pocket because I couldn't explain why it was there. At the time, I'd figured it had fallen off somebody's coat or a kid's bag. People lose things. Farms collect lost things. That explanation wasn't working as well anymore. The pin pressed against my side when I shifted. I put one hand over the pocket and felt the small, hard shape through the fabric. The marks on the wall weren't decoration. Nobody makes thousands of marks for decoration. They were counting something. I looked at the folding chair again. Then I noticed the sneaker. It was lying beside a metal bowl on the floor near the back wall. A child's sneaker, small enough that I could have held it in one hand. Blue and white, with dirt along the rubber edge and the laces loose. It didn't look like it had been sitting there for years. The fabric was still clean. The sole wasn't cracked. There was water in the bowl beside it. I crouched down but didn't get too close. The water was clear. No straw floating in it. No dust. No skin or film gathered along the surface. Even the rim of the bowl was clean. Dust gets everywhere. A room like this should have had a gray skin on the bowl and dirt around the bottom. The water should have smelled stale. It didn't. Somebody had put it there. Somebody was maintaining the room. I stood up too fast and bumped the back of my head against one of the studs. The pain was sharp but brief. I held still with one hand on the wall and listened again. The barn stayed quiet. I didn't feel relieved. I felt worse. Before that room, I had a dead farm, some salvage equipment, and a bad feeling I couldn't put a name to. After the room, I had proof that the place wasn't empty. The bank paperwork didn't change that. Neither did the dark meter or the old tire tracks. I started backing toward the opening. I kept the headlamp pointed into the room. I didn't want to turn my back on the chair or the sneaker or the water bowl. Nothing had moved. Nothing had made a sound. Still, I didn't turn around. My heel found the edge of the opening. I reached behind me with one hand and felt for the side of the barn wall. The pry bar was still in my other hand. I had to angle my shoulders to get through. Then something moved outside. Metal rolling on metal. I froze. The sliding barn door at the front of the building started moving along its track. I couldn't see it from the room, but I heard the rollers complain and the door scrape across the concrete. It moved slow at first, then faster. The noise came down the length of the barn and filled the hidden room. There was no wind strong enough to move a door that size. Even if there had been, the door was supposed to be held open. I'd left it that way when I came inside. The rollers hit the end of the track. The door slammed shut with a heavy boom. The sound shook dust out of the seams above me. I ducked and put my hand against the wall. For a second, I couldn't hear anything except the ringing in my ears. The main entrance was closed. I backed through the hole and landed in the rear stalls. My headlamp beam jumped across the pallets and the old rails. The light from outside was gone, and the building seemed smaller than it had before. I turned toward the front. There wasn't much to see through the siding. The boards were old and had gaps between them. A thin line of light moved across the floor, then another. The beam got brighter. Headlights. I crouched behind the feed pallets and held the pry bar close to my chest. The light swept across the concrete and climbed the opposite wall. Dust showed in the beam. A vehicle rolled over the gravel outside. The sound came closer. Slow. Not somebody passing on the road. Somebody coming into the yard. I looked toward the side door where I'd entered. It was still behind me. The padlock hung loose from the hasp, and the door hadn't been shut all the way. I could get out that way if whoever was outside didn't see me first. The headlights moved through the gaps in the siding again. The vehicle crossed in front of the barn and blocked the van. I couldn't see the whole thing from where I was, but I saw the dark shape pass across the light and heard gravel crunch under the tires. Then the engine stopped. I switched off my headlamp. That's the first thing you learn doing this kind of work, or the first thing you learn if you're smart enough to still be doing it after a few years. Light gives you away before sound does. Sound you can sometimes explain. A light moving around in a dark barn doesn't explain itself to anybody. So I killed it, and the dark came down over everything at once, thick and complete. The kind of dark where you can't tell the difference between your eyes being open or shut. Then a voice started counting from outside the barn. 1. A pause. 2. Another pause even, like he was reading it off a clock instead of just saying it. 3. I didn't move, back there in that black barn, and I thought, real clear and practical, he's going to keep counting. That's what counting is. It keeps going. I didn't know what he was counting toward or why, but I knew I didn't want to find out standing in the middle of the floor. I felt my way back along the bulk tank with one hand flat against the cold metal side of it, and there was a gap between the tank and the concrete block wall behind it. Not much of one, maybe 1.5 feet. Just wide enough that a 15-year-old built the way I'm built could fold himself into it if he didn't mind his shoulder blades scraping block the whole way down. I minded. I did it anyway. I got my back against the wall and the tank against my chest, near enough that I could feel the vibration of my own heartbeat bounce off it and come back at me. I kept the pry bar low against my leg, and I kept my other hand flat on the tank, steadying myself, because there wasn't anywhere to sit and nothing to hold on to except cold metal and colder block. The little door on the side, the man door, the one I'd come in through myself not that long before, opened. It didn't open on a squeak like the padlock hasp had. It opened smooth, like somebody used it regular. 2 men came through it. I couldn't see faces, not really, just shapes moving with a flashlight between them. But I could tell one was older. He walked slow and even, no hurry in it at all. Like he'd done whatever this was 100 times before and there wasn't any reason to rush the 101st. The other one moved different, quicker, jumpy. He had the flashlight and he swung it around the barn in these short, nervous arcs, like he expected the dark to jump out at him. The older one spoke, and he didn't raise his voice. It came out flat and even, aimed at the wall where the hidden room was. "You're early. The occupant will be hungry." I didn't know who he was talking to. There wasn't anybody in that room that I'd seen. Just the chair and the sneaker and the bowl of water that was too clean to have been sitting there on its own. I understood, standing there jammed behind that tank. That occupant wasn't a word you use for an empty room. The younger one had a bag over his shoulder, and he was hauling something else along too. Cans by the sound of it, metal knocking metal, and he wasn't being careful with any of it. His flashlight beam swept low along the floor, along the stalls, past the pallets I'd moved, and it came so close to my boots that I saw the light change color where it hit the dust just past my toe. I didn't breathe. I held it, all the way, until my chest started to burn a little because breathing loud in a quiet barn is its own kind of light. The beam moved on. It didn't find me. I don't know if that was luck or if I just got small enough, but either way it moved on, and I let a little air out through my nose, slow, the way you let air out of a tire you don't want to hear hiss. Then the younger one's foot caught a steel milk can sitting near the stalls, and it went over with a bang that filled the whole building, and it rolled straight at me, gathering up speed on the concrete the way those old cans do, and it hit my shin edge on hard enough that white flashed behind my eyes. I didn't make a sound. I want that on the record, even if there's nobody keeping one. I bit down on it. I've stubbed a toe on a porch step and hollered loud enough to wake the dog, but I didn't make a sound standing behind that tank, because making a sound meant that flashlight coming back around, and this time it wouldn't be sweeping past. The older one didn't even look over at the noise. "Careful," he said, not sharp, just a fact he was stating, and the younger one said something back too quick and low for me to catch, something that sounded like sorry, and I heard him picking the can back up. They went toward the hidden room next. I heard the plywood I'd already torn loose scrape further, and I heard the folding chair get dragged across the concrete. That particular sound a metal chair leg makes getting pulled instead of carried. A sound I know from every church basement and Cub Scout meeting I ever sat through, except here it made my skin crawl instead of just being a chair getting moved. Then chain. I heard chain, a length of it being fed out, link over link, that soft clinking sound, and I heard it being threaded through something, wood most likely, the studs maybe, the ones with the tally marks cut into them in their little bundles of 13. I couldn't see it happening. I didn't need to. I could hear exactly where that chain was going, right through the section of wall I'd been standing in front of not 20 minutes earlier, counting marks I still didn't understand, and now somebody was running a chain through that same wood like it was hardware, like it had a purpose besides being counted. I stayed pressed into that gap and didn't move a muscle past what it cost me to keep breathing quiet. And I thought about how my van was sitting out there blocked in by whatever they'd driven up in, and how my tools were still out by the side door, and how none of that mattered right then, because the only tool that mattered was the pry bar against my leg, and the only plan I had was don't be found. The chain stopped moving. Both of them went still at the same time, which is its own kind of loud, a stillness that lands harder than the noise before it, and I heard their boots turn on the concrete, both of them, toward the man door. Something had made a sound out in the yard. The boots turned. I heard them turn, both sets, and I went stiff behind the tank, not breathing, not even trying to guess what had made the noise outside, because that wasn't my job right then. My job was to be a piece of the barn. Nothing happened for a second. Then the man door opened again, and it wasn't just the older one and the jumpy one coming back in. There was a third set of feet, and these ones were stumbling. "Move," the older man said, and I heard somebody get shoved, hard enough that whoever it was went down onto the concrete with a thud that sounded like it hurt. The jumpy one, Parker, though I didn't have that name yet, wouldn't get it for another minute or two, said something fast and nervous, like he was checking his work. Nobody followed him. I looked the whole way up the drive, there's nobody. "Check again," the older one said. Flat. Not mad. Just a thing he wanted done. I heard the door open a second time and the crunch of somebody walking out onto the gravel, and then it shut, and it was just the older man and whoever he'd shoved down on the floor. He was breathing hard, ragged, like he'd been running and something made him stop. He didn't say anything. I don't think he trusted himself to. The older man spoke again, closer now. His voice pointed at the wall that hid the room, no warmer or colder than it had been before. "Get up." Whoever it was got up. I heard the scrape of sneakers dragging. And then he was pushed my direction. Not straight at me, at the room, at that torn open plywood. But the push wasn't gentle, and it wasn't aimed careful, and he stumbled off the line he was supposed to be walking and came down hard into the gap where I was hiding, right on top of my boot. I felt him. A body, thin, shaking. He froze the second he touched me, like he'd grabbed something he didn't expect to feel move. He didn't yell. I'll give him that. Whatever else happened after, he didn't yell. His face turned toward mine in the dark, close enough I could feel his breath, and even though I couldn't see him, not really, just a shape, a smell of dirt and sweat and something like motor oil, I understood he'd figured out exactly what I was. Another kid jammed into the same hiding spot, holding as still as he could. "Who?" he started, and I put my hand flat against his chest. Not hard, just enough to say don't. And he stopped. His mouth kept moving anyway. No sound to it at first, just shapes. And then a whisper so thin it barely counted as talking at all. "They're gonna come back for me," he said. "I saw you. I know you're there. I ain't gonna say nothing." I didn't answer. I didn't trust my own voice not to carry. "I'm Nathan," he whispered. Like that was the most normal thing in the world to be doing right then. Trading names in a gap behind a bulk tank while a man with a hammer stood 20 feet away. "I was out here for scrap. Same as you, I bet. I seen your tape. Orange tape on the pipes." Quick and scared, the words coming out clipped, like he didn't have the breath to spend on whole sentences. "This farm ain't empty," he said. "Never was. They just made it look that way. 2 years now. They stopped paying on it on purpose. Let the bank take it. Cut the power so nobody'd come check on it. Wrote it off as vacant so nobody'd come looking." I wanted to ask him how he knew that. I didn't, because asking meant talking, and talking meant sound, and sound meant the hammer. "They never left," he whispered. "They just went where nobody'd think to check, under the house. Back here. I've been taking scrap off farms around here for months, and I seen them moving around at night plenty of times. I never got close enough before. Not till tonight." Something scraped against wood, off toward the room, heavy and deliberate, and Nathan's whole body went rigid against mine. "That room," he said, so quiet now it was mostly just breath shaped into words. "That's where they keep it. The water bowl, the shoe. That's so it stays calm. I saw once from outside, through a gap in the boards." "Saw what?" I mouthed, no real sound behind it, but he understood me anyway. "I don't know what to call it," he said. "It. The thing. It ain't a person in there. The marks on the wall, they ain't days. They're offerings. 13 to a bunch. That's what it wants before it settles. 13, and it's done for a while. They're short one right now. That's why they went looking tonight. That's why they got me." A hammer came down somewhere close, one hard strike, then another, driving into wood, and I felt every one of them land in my back teeth even from that distance. "Every time somebody wanders in and they're short," Nathan whispered. "He calls them a replacement. That's the word he uses. Replacement." His hand found my arm in the dark and gripped it, too hard, shaking. "You showed up tonight. You're the one that's missing. He's gonna call you that. I heard him say it about the last one too." I didn't say anything back. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't cost us both. Out past the tank, the hammering kept going, even and unhurried, like a man tacking down a fence rail. And then it stopped, and the older man's voice came again, low and satisfied, talking past us to somebody else in the room. "Secure," he said. "Now we finish the count clean." And he started over. 1. Nathan's breathing went ragged next to me. Loud. Too loud for the space we were in, and I felt it more than heard it, his chest hitching against my arm, and I knew what was about to happen before it happened. The way you know a glass is about to tip off a counter a half second before it goes. Greg was still counting. 4. I got my hand up over Nathan's mouth. Not hard. Just enough to say quiet, the same as before. And for a second it worked. He went still under my palm. And I thought maybe we'd get through this. Then Parker got the chain loose from wherever it was locked. Some kind of clip or hasp. I heard the little metallic click of it, and Nathan came apart right there against me. He shoved my hand off his face and he ran. I want to say I grabbed for him. I don't know if I did. It happened fast, faster than thinking, and 1 second he was pressed against my side shaking, and the next he was gone, out into the open barn, sneakers slapping concrete, heading for the man door, same as I would have gone if it was me. Parker lunged for him and missed. I saw that much through the gap, a shape reaching and closing on nothing. Greg didn't move. He didn't chase, didn't yell, didn't even turn his head that I could tell. He just kept counting, even and flat, like Nathan running for his life was a piece of weather passing through that didn't concern him one way or another. 5, 6, 7. He kept going right up through it. No hurry in his voice at all, and that was the part that got into me and stayed there. 13, he said, and stopped, and said it again slower, like he wanted to make sure it landed. 13. The floor in that hidden room made a sound, wet, cascading, like somebody dumped a bucket of water, but it kept dumping, on, longer than a bucket should hold, and I felt it under my boots, some kind of shifting in the concrete that came from the clean room and rolled out toward the doorway. Nathan screamed once, just once. Then there were sounds after it, 3 or 4 of them, heavy, like sacks of feed dropped from a height, one right after another, and I understood without anybody telling me that the screaming had stopped because there wasn't anything left doing the screaming. I didn't move. I want to be honest about that. I didn't try to help him. Some part of me hated myself for that, even so. Out past the tank, I heard both of them go down onto the concrete, not running, kneeling. Greg first and then Parker right behind, their knees hitting the floor almost together, and neither one of them said a word. They kept their heads down. Something moved through the clean room and out into the barn, slow, and it came with a smell. Hot sour milk gone bad mixed with something fresh and copper underneath it. Blood. I'm not going to pretend I didn't know exactly what that second smell was. The water bowl went over. I heard it roll a little on the concrete. Something dragged across the floor after it. A long, slow scraping sound. Not feet. Not anything I could match to feet. I got my eye down to the gap under the siding boards because I couldn't help it. I think about that a lot now, whether looking was the dumbest thing I did all night, dumber even than cutting that lock in the first place. I didn't see a face. I want to say that plain because it matters. I didn't see arms or legs or anything I could call a body. What I saw was low and wide, and it had sections to it, jointed somehow, moving in a way that didn't line up with any animal I've ever watched move. Not a dog, not a deer, not anything with a name. It crossed through my little sliver of view and was gone before I could make it hold still in my head. Then Nathan's sneaker came sliding out of the clean room, alone, and stopped in the open part of the barn where the flashlight beam had swept earlier. Nobody was wearing it. Nothing came out after it. Greg's voice, still down low, still kneeling. "The count is complete." Parker said something back, thin and shaky, something like, "Okay, okay," and I heard him swallow hard enough that I caught it even from where I was. "We're clean," Greg said, "until the next 13. The shape, whatever it was, drew back the way it had come, and the chain dragged across the floor of the doorway behind it, link over link, going home, and somewhere in there I heard the bowl get set up right again. Careful, deliberate, the same way you'd right a glass you'd knocked over at somebody else's table. I stayed behind that tank a good while after the bowl got set right side up again. Longer than I needed to, maybe. But my legs had turned to something like wet rope, and I wasn't in a hurry to find out if they'd hold me. Greg and Parker were busy with the chair and the chain, getting everything back the way it was supposed to look, and neither one of them so much as glanced toward the man door. They weren't thinking about me at all right then. I slid out from behind the tank an inch at a time. Didn't touch my headlamp. Wasn't about to. There was copper up on those pipes I'd already taped, and there was a bucket's worth of brass fittings around that bulk tank I still hadn't touched, and my pry bar was lying somewhere on the concrete where I'd set it down before all this started. I left every bit of it. That pry bar cost me $18 at the farm store in Waupaca, and I never went back for it. I think about that sometimes. $18 just sitting on a barn floor. But carrying tools out of there would have meant noise, and noise wasn't a trade I was willing to make that night for any amount of scrap. I got to the man door on feet that didn't feel like mine, and I got it open slow, the way it wanted to open, no squeak, same as it had opened for them. Outside, the air hit me different than it had going in. Colder, cleaner, if that makes sense, considering everything that had just happened 20 feet behind me. The truck was still sitting there blocking my van, same spot it had pulled into hours before, headlights long since switched off. I went for it without really deciding to. My salvage pouch was still on my belt, thank God, because that's where the folding knife lived, the one I use for stripping wire mostly. Not much of a knife as knives go, but a knife's a knife when you need one bad enough. I dropped down by the front tire and found the valve stem with my thumb and pressed the blade against it. It hissed out slow at first, then faster. That particular sound air makes leaving a tire, and I moved around to the next one and did the same, and the next, and the next. All four, working fast because fast mattered more than quiet right then. I figured if Greg and Parker came out that door before I made it off the property, at least they wouldn't be driving anywhere after me. It didn't amount to much of a plan, but it was what I had. I left my van sitting there too. Never even looked at it long. There wasn't a version of that night where I got the van started and drove it out past their truck, not blocked in the way it was. So the van joined the pry bar and the copper and the brass on the list of things I walked away from. Then I ran. 40 acres doesn't sound like much until you're crossing it in the dark with your lungs already half burned out from holding your breath behind a bulk tank for what felt like an hour. I went by feel mostly, by the shape of the field against the sky, aiming for where I remembered the county road running along the far side of the property. I pulled my phone out once just to check, and it had nothing. No bars, not one. Maybe that farm sat in some kind of dead spot, or maybe the phone company never bothered stringing a tower out that far, but either way I put it back in my pocket and kept my legs moving instead of standing there staring at a screen that wasn't going to help me. I thought about calling somebody. I thought about it the whole way across that field. Dale's number sitting right there in my phone even without a signal to send it anywhere, and the sheriff's number too, easy enough to dial. But there wasn't any signal to dial it with, and even if there had been, nothing I could say was going to sound like anything but a fever dream, a hammer, a count, a thing that came out of a hole in a concrete floor. I didn't have words lined up for any of that yet, and I still don't. Not really. The nearest house with lights in the windows had to be a mile off at least, maybe more, and screaming for help out there would have done about as much good as screaming at the moon. I hit the ditch along the county road hard enough to go down on one knee, and I got up, and I didn't look back to see if headlights were coming up behind me from the farm, because looking back wasn't going to change whether they were. Headlights did come, but they came from the other direction, down the road, and I stood right out in the open and waved my arms like a fool, and the car slowed and stopped. The driver leaned across and asked what in the world I was doing out walking the county road this time of night. And I told him my van had broken down and I'd had to leave it. And he didn't ask a single thing more than that, just nodded like it was the most ordinary story in the world and told me to get in. He was headed toward Waupaca anyway. I didn't say one word about the barn, not one word about the farm or the chain or Nathan or anything else. I just sat there with my hands shaking a little in my lap and let the dark fields go by the window. He let me out at the edge of Waupaca before the sun came up, the sky just barely starting to gray out over the rooftops, and he drove off without waiting to see what I did next. I was left on that road with no van, no tools, no phone call made to anybody, and not one word of explanation ready for anybody who might ask. There's a gas station on the edge of Waupaca that opens early, and it's got one of those old payphones bolted to the wall by the ice machine, the kind that most towns tore out years ago because nobody uses them anymore. I've walked past that phone probably 100 times without thinking twice about it. That morning I thought I might kiss it. I didn't have a quarter. I had to go inside and buy a pack of gum, not that I had any use for it, just to get change. And the guy behind the counter looked at me like I'd crawled out of a ditch, which I guess I basically had. Mud on my jeans up to the knee, grass stains. I probably smelled like the ditch, too. I called Dale's cell from that phone and he picked up on the second ring, groggy, like I'd woken him up, which I probably had.
Yeah?
It's me, I said. I need you to come get me. I'm at the gas station on the east end by the highway. There was a pause.
Where's the van?
I'll explain when you get here.
Gordon.
Just come get me, Dale. He didn't answer right away, and then he said, fine, 20 minutes, and hung up before I could say anything else. I held that dead phone for a second longer than I needed to. My hand wasn't all the way steady yet. Hadn't been since the barn. 20 minutes turned into about 25, and I spent them sitting on the curb outside, not going back in for anything, just watching the road. Waupaca wakes up slow. A couple trucks went by. Somebody's dog barked at something down the block. Dale's truck pulled in and he was out of it before it even finished rolling to a stop good.
Where's the van?
He said. Not a question this time. A demand. Where's our equipment, Gordon? You better have a good reason. The job went bad, I said. I left everything. The van, the tools, all of it. You left the van. He said it flat, like the words didn't make sense stacked together that way. You left a $5,000 van sitting on some foreclosed farm and walked here. That's what you're telling me. That's what happened. That ain't an answer, that's a... He stopped himself, rubbed a hand down his face. Start talking. What happened out there? I looked at him. I wanted to tell him. I'll admit that much now. Some part of me wanted to just open my mouth and let the whole thing fall out. The barn, the plywood, the chain. Nathan sliding into that gap next to me shaking like a wet dog. The counting, the sound the floor made. All of it. But every road that story took led back to the same place, which was me admitting I'd cut a lock off a building that wasn't mine to cut, and then sat there for hours instead of calling anybody the second things went sideways. Dale won't let that slide. He'd want to know why I didn't call the second I heard voices, or why I didn't call after that either. He'd have questions I didn't have answers for that wouldn't also open up into the parts I couldn't say out loud yet. Maybe couldn't ever. It went bad, I said again. That's all I've got right now. That's all you've got. He wasn't buying it, and I didn't blame him. Gordon, we can't keep taking jobs blind like this. I told you that farm felt off from the start, I told you. You didn't tell me anything. You canceled and I went by myself. That landed somewhere it shouldn't have, and I saw it land. I felt bad about it even while I was saying it, because it was true, and it was also a way of turning the conversation instead of answering it. Dale's not stupid. He knows when somebody's doing that to him. He looked at me a long minute. Then he sighed, the way he does, and said, "Get in the truck." We didn't talk much on the way out. Dale drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw doing that thing it does when he's chewing on being mad and not saying it. I watched the fields go by, the same fields I'd crossed in the dark, not knowing where the road even was. He got us as far as the gravel that turns off toward the farm, and he slowed down there, easing off the gas like he expected me to tell him which way to go from there. I didn't tell him anything. I just sat there. "That's it, right?" he said. "Right up there?" I didn't answer. He pulled the truck over onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires, same sound the truck at the farm had made, and my stomach turned. "Well," Dale said, "we gonna go get the van or not? I ain't driving all the way out here for nothing." I looked up that gravel road. I could see the top of the barn from where we sat, gray against the gray sky, same as it had looked from the yard the night before. Except now there was daylight on it, and it still didn't look like any place I wanted to be within a mile of. "I'm not going back up there," I said. "What?" "I'm not going back up there, Dale. Not today. Not for the van, not for the tools, none of it." He put the truck in park, like that decision was going to require both of us standing outside it. "Gordon, that's our equipment. That's our money sitting up there." I got out anyway. I stood on the gravel with the wind coming across the field, cold enough to bite. I looked at that road one more time. The same road I'd run off of in the dark hours before, with nothing but the shape of the ditch to steer by. Then I turned my back on it and walked a few steps toward the truck's tailgate instead. Dale stayed by the driver's door, arms crossed now, waiting on me to say something that made any of this make sense. I never went back for the van, and I let the pry bar go too, the same way you write off a fish that gets away with your hook still in its mouth. You don't chase it, you just buy another hook. Dale drove me home from the shoulder of that gravel road without saying much, and I appreciated that more than I told him. He's not a quiet guy by nature. Dale likes to talk things through, likes to poke at a problem until it makes sense to him. And me standing there saying, "I'm not going back up there," wasn't the kind of answer that usually satisfies him. But he let it sit that day. I think he could see something on my face that told him pushing wasn't going to get him anywhere. Or maybe he just didn't want to know bad enough yet to fight me for it. It was 3 days later that the farm burned. I heard about it the way you hear about most things now, which is somebody mentions it, and then you go looking on your phone to see if it's true. A guy Dale knows from another crew said there'd been a fire out past Wapaka, some old dairy place, burned right down to the block foundation. I didn't say anything. I just nodded like it was any other bit of news, and then I went home and sat on my bed and read every article I could find about it. The county paper had the most on it. State fire investigators came out and looked at what was left, and they called it arson. No hedging on that part. Said it started in the milking barn and moved fast from there. Faster than a barn full of old hay and rotten wood should really burn on its own. No bodies. Not in the barn, not in the farmhouse, nothing. That word kept showing up in the coverage, no bodies. Like the reporter wanted to make sure everybody understood there wasn't a story there. No dead family to write a sad piece about. Just an empty, foreclosed farm that somebody had apparently decided needed to not exist anymore. The family that used to own it, the McCartys, they were still listed as whereabouts unknown. Which is a strange phrase when you think about it, because it means somebody went looking and didn't find anything. Not even a body. Not even a note. The bank wrote the whole property off as a total loss and moved on to whatever banks move on to. I imagine there's a stack of paperwork somewhere with a stamp on it that says as much, filed away next to 100 other stacks just like it. I never called anybody about what I saw out there. I've turned it over in my head plenty of times since then. Whether I should have called, whether there was a version of that phone call that could have worked. There wasn't. Any version of me picking up a phone and saying there's a man out there named Greg who counts to 13, and something answers him, has to start with the padlock. I cut off a building that wasn't mine, and the hours I spent sitting there afterward without dialing anybody, right up until I heard Nathan Miller die 20 feet away from me. There's no way to tell that story that doesn't end with somebody asking me why I didn't do something sooner, and I didn't have an answer for that then, and I still don't. So the fire did whatever telling needed doing. I let it. When I got home that first night, before any of the fire business, I emptied my jacket pockets out onto the dresser the way I always do. Coins and a receipt and a bit of orange tape stuck to my thumb, and there was the pin. I don't remember picking it up. I must have grabbed it off that shelf in that back room without even deciding to. The way you'll pocket a bottle cap or a marble as a kid, just because your hand does it before your head catches up. It's small, plain white enamel, a circle about the size of a quarter, and around the edge of it, 13 black dots, spaced even as anything, like somebody with a steady hand and a lot of patience had gone around it with a fine brush. I looked at it under my desk lamp for a long time that night. I don't know what I expected it to do. Nothing, obviously. It just sat there in my palm being a pin. I thought about throwing it out. Twice I actually carried it to the trash can in my room and stood there over it. Both times I put it back down on the dresser instead. I couldn't tell you why, not in a way that makes sense out loud. It felt like throwing it away would be pretending none of it happened, and keeping it felt like admitting it did, and somehow admitting it felt like the smaller lie of the two. So I opened my sock drawer and put it in the back corner under some things I don't wear, and I closed the drawer. Dale and I went back to work about a week after. Regular jobs. A collapsed hog barn outside Amherst, a couple of old farmhouses the bank wanted cleared before winter. Nothing that gave me any trouble. Dale never brought up the van again after that first day, which surprised me some, though I did notice he stopped canceling on jobs after that. If I called him, he showed up. I think he'd decided somewhere along the line that whatever I wasn't telling him, he'd rather be standing next to me the next time it happened than hear about it after the fact from a gas station payphone. There was one thing that did change, and it wasn't anything Dale noticed. Or if he did, he never said. I still pull the foreclosure lists, same as always. Still check the utility records before we drive anywhere. Meter readings, water usage, all the same habits I've had for years. But I don't take Wapaka County jobs anymore. Not one. Dale found a decent one out that way back in the spring. An old grain elevator the bank wanted stripped, good money in the steel alone, and I just told him no, find something else. And he asked why maybe twice before he let it go. And the other thing, the bigger thing, is that I don't trust an empty building the way I used to. Used to be no power on the meter and no cars in the yard meant nobody home, plain as that, and I'd walk in with my headlamp already deciding where I was going to look first. I still walk in. Job's a job. But some part of me now checks the dark corners a little longer before I move past them. And I don't ever assume the quiet in a place means the place is actually empty. It might just mean whatever's in there hasn't decided yet whether it's worth making a sound. I still open that sock drawer sometimes, not for socks, just to look. The pin's always right where I left it, 13 dots catching a little bit of whatever light's in the room. I've never taken it out again, not since that first night. I just look at it a second, and then I close the drawer, and I go on with whatever I was doing before I opened it.